Before we get into today's tale of humanity facing down the galaxy's deadliest predator, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment about what you do if you found this monster in your backyard, and subscribe so you never miss more HFY stories like this one. The galaxy had learned one bitter truth. No prison could hold the creature they called the Predator. Chains forged from neutronium shattered in its grip. Quantum containment fields unraveled when its claws carved patterns no engineer had foreseen. Armored soldiers trained across a dozen worlds marched against it, only to scatter as their comrades fell in pieces. The Predator's legend spread like wildfire, whole empires whispered of planets bled dry because it could not be bound. To encounter it was to meet extinction. Yet all legends risk exaggeration. At least, that was how Jacob Rourke saw it when he first heard the rumors. Jacob had not asked for any of this. He lived far from cities, tucked into a valley of scrubland and pine where his nearest neighbor was miles away. Once, he had been a combat engineer, one of the best Earth had produced, the kind of man who could improvise a stronghold out of scrap metal under fire. But wars ended, commands dissolved, and Jacob found himself craving silence. His ranch wasn't much. A weather-beaten house, a barn that always needed repair, and a yard ringed with fencing meant to corral stubborn cattle. Still, it was his, and that mattered. The galaxy, however, didn't care about the peace one man had carved for himself. The first sign was the streak in the sky, a burning shard that split the night above his land. Jacob thought it a meteor until he heard the sound, less like rocks splitting air and more like something alive roaring in fury as it fell. The ground shook when it landed beyond the ridge. He saddled his ATV and drove toward the smoke, curiosity overcoming caution. He told himself it was habit. Soldiers investigate. Farmers ignore. He had never been good at the latter. What he found wasn't a meteor. The crater belched steam. At its center, crouched and heaving like some nightmare dragged from mythology, was a creature taller than any bear yet faster than a wolf. Its body was armored with chitin and scarred hide, its eyes burning with an intelligence that froze Jacob where he stood. He had seen apex predators before in war zones, humans with rifles and the will to use them, but nothing like this. The air smelled of iron and ozone, as if the beast itself exhaled violence. He wasn't the only one who had followed the crash. Above the ridge, 3 vessels broke through the clouds, angular things that pulsed with alien energy. They didn't descend in triumph. They hovered at distance, their searchlights stabbing down, then retreated like vultures spooked by the very prey they sought. Jacob caught a glimpse of their insignia, jagged glyphs he didn't recognize, but the intent was clear enough. Hunters. And they feared their quarry. The predator rose from the crater with an almost casual grace. Chains still dangled from its limbs, glowing with alien circuitry that sparked and died in the dirt. Jacob understood then. This thing had been caged, transported, and as the ship's retreat proved, it had broken free. His mind raced with questions. Why here? Why Earth? Why his valley? The beast turned toward him. Every instinct screamed to run. Its gaze pinned him as firmly as any rifle sight. Jacob's hands twitched toward the sidearm on his hip, but training stayed him. He knew the futility of a pistol against a monster that shrugged off energy cannons. So he did the only thing left, he stood his ground. For a long breath, the predator studied him. Muscles coiled under scarred hide, claws flexed, breath came in measured huffs. Then it stepped forward, not to strike but to circle, its movement deliberate, testing. Like a wolf measuring another wolf. Jacob swallowed the dryness in his throat. Guess you're not just muscle, he muttered. His words vanished into the night, but the beast tilted its head as if listening. It moved toward his property, toward the fence line meant for cattle. Jacob followed at a distance, ATV rumbling behind, every nerve on edge. The alien ships trailed briefly, then withdrew entirely. Whatever their mission had been, none of them were willing to interfere while the predator stalked Earth's soil. That, Jacob realized, left him alone with it. When the beast reached the fence line, it paused. The flimsy wooden posts, the wire strung tight, laughable compared to the armories it had escaped before. Yet instead of trampling through, it pressed a claw against the wood, leaned its weight and stepped back. Test. Jacob felt a grim smile tug at his lips despite the terror tightening his chest. You think it's a game, he said softly. You're daring me to stop you. The predator's rumbling exhale carried almost like agreement. Hours passed with that strange ritual. Jacob reinforced one corner of the fence with steel from his shed, hammer ringing under the stars. The predator prowled just beyond the glow of his floodlights, eyes gleaming, occasionally slashing at the wire only to retreat when Jacob strode forward to mend it. A silent contest began, predator and man bound not by chains or weapons but by will. At dawn, Jacob slumped on his porch steps, tools scattered, sweat streaking his face. The predator lay across the yard, massive frame coiled like a watchful hound. It could have left at any moment. It hadn't. Jacob realized then what the galaxy had missed. Cages of alloy and force fields failed not because they were weak, but because they were impersonal. The predator wasn't some mindless beast. It sought challenge, respect, a rival worth its attention. And somehow, impossibly, it had found that rival in him. As the morning sun broke over the valley, Jacob stared across his yard at the nightmare every world feared. The creature stared back. Neither moved. For the first time, Jacob felt not just fear but anticipation. The predator had chosen its ground. And it had chosen him. Jacob rose with the sun, stiff from a night half spent on the porch with tools scattered around him. He hadn't slept, not properly. Every time his eyes shut, the faint scrape of claws against wood or the deep rumble of breath reminded him he wasn't alone anymore. The predator still lingered in the yard, a hulking silhouette resting just beyond the barn. It hadn't attacked. It hadn't left. It simply existed there watching. That unsettled Jacob more than any show of violence. He poured coffee into a chipped mug, the bitter steam steadying his nerves. The beast stirred at the sound of the door opening, golden eyes lifting toward him with a sharpness that made his skin prickle. He refused to flinch. Letting fear rule him was the first step to surrender, and Jacob Rourke didn't surrender. He stepped off the porch and approached the fence where the predator had pressed its weight the night before. The wood groaned beneath its claw marks, nearly splintered. Jacob crouched and ran his hand over the damage, calculating angles, stress points, reinforcement methods. He didn't look at the predator until he spoke. "You're not breaking this one." The words weren't for bravado. They were a promise to himself. He worked methodically through the morning. Steel beams scavenged from an old shed became struts. Welding arcs sparked as he fused them to concrete bases poured years before for a cattle corral. He adjusted tension in the wire until it thrummed like piano strings. Each strike of hammer or hiss of flame echoed across the yard, and each time he glanced up, the predator was there, crouched low, observing every movement. It tested his work. Not with a furious rush but with deliberate precision, leaning against the beams, tugging at the wire with claws, retreating when Jacob turned his gaze on it. Almost like a sparring partner. The strange rhythm between them formed. Jacob built, the predator challenged, Jacob adapted. By midday sweat soaked his shirt, but he didn't stop. He muttered under his breath while working, old habits from deployments when silence meant vulnerability. Reinforce the joint, don't give him leverage. You want to pull fine, but I'll give you nothing soft to pull on. The predator's chest vibrated with a low growl, not menacing but almost amused. Jacob paused, staring at it across the fence. For an instant, the beast looked like it was listening. "You understand me, don't you?" Jacob asked quietly. The predator tilted its head, eyes narrowing, then raked its claws across the dirt in answer. Jacob let out a sharp exhale, a laugh caught between nerves and disbelief. "Well, hell. Guess I've got company then." The afternoon wore on. Jacob carried steel plates, bolted them across weak spots, set traps of reinforced mesh at the ground where the creature had pushed hardest. Every improvement seemed to intrigue it further. By the time shadows stretched long across the valley, the predator prowled along the perimeter with restless energy, hurling itself once against the fencing only to rebound as the structure held. Jacob leaned on his hammer, chest heaving, and allowed himself a grim smile. "Not so easy, is it?" The creature didn't flee. It returned to the same spot, pressed its claws against the steel and held them there. Jacob felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't mere frustration. This was ritual, some strange acknowledgement. He wiped sweat from his brow, meeting its gaze across the bars he had forged, and felt the ground shift beneath the certainty he had carried all his life. At dusk, Jacob fetched his last reserves of scrap. He welded until sparks lit the yard like fireflies, every strike echoing in the quiet night. When at last he stepped back, the cage loomed, not polished or elegant but solid, brutal and real. Steel mesh, concrete anchors, reinforced angles only a soldier would think to use. It looked less like a prison and more like a fortress disguised as a corral. He left the gate open. The predator prowled close. Its massive frame cast a shadow that swallowed the floodlights. Jacob steadied his breath, every nerve taut as the beast lowered its head and stepped inside. Not forced, not tricked. Chosen. It stalked the length of the cage, claws clicking against steel, tested one corner, then another. Jacob braced himself for the inevitable explosion of power, the tearing of bars, the roar that had sent alien warships fleeing. Instead, the creature turned in a slow circle and lowered itself to the ground. It lay there, silent, golden eyes gleaming through the mesh. Jacob didn't move. He hardly breathed. Hours passed in the tense quiet of the yard, until finally fatigue dragged him into uneasy sleep on the porch. He woke to dawn light spilling across the valley. The predator was still there, coiled but calm, waiting as though it had always belonged. The fence bore fresh gouges, tests made during the night, but it remained standing. More important, the predator had not left, even though Jacob knew it could have. He rubbed his eyes, staring at the impossible sight, a laugh bubbling in his throat before he could stop it. "Guess I built something you like." The creature's throat rumbled, low and resonant, a sound neither threat nor submission but something stranger. Jacob felt a chill despite the morning warmth. He realized this was not victory, not yet. It was the beginning of a contest more dangerous than any war he had fought. A battle of wills, day by day, steel against claw, persistence against raw power. The galaxy had failed to bind this monster. Armies, technologies, prisons, all shattered. And yet, in the quiet stretch of his backyard, Jacob had forged the first place it chose to remain. He didn't fool himself. The predator wasn't tame. It wasn't safe. But it was here, and it was watching him with the intensity of an equal. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob gathered his tools once more. Reinforcements to add, weak points to close, a gate to strengthen. He wasn't finished. And neither, he knew, was the predator. The fence groaned as the creature rose and pressed against it again, eyes fixed on him. Jacob met that gaze, heart pounding, and tightened his grip on the hammer. "All right, beast," he murmured. Round 2. The predator's growl vibrated through the steel, and Jacob knew the game had only just begun. Jacob had grown accustomed to the sound of claws on steel. Each night the predator tested the cage, scraping, pushing, measuring. Each morning Jacob answered by welding, bolting, and reinforcing, until the corral in his backyard looked less like ranch fencing and more like a fortress built for war. It wasn't escape he feared. The creature could leave if it chose. It was the contest, the strange unspoken agreement that bound them together. What unsettled him most was not its strength but its patience. The predator waited, always watching, as if deciding what kind of man Jacob truly was. The silence of their ritual broke when the sky trembled with engines. Jacob recognized the sound instantly. He had heard it the night of the crash, when those ships hovered just long enough to confirm their fear before retreating. Now they returned, their hulls glinting with the sheen of mercenary craft. They descended beyond the ridge, cautious but deliberate. From the porch Jacob counted 5, maybe 6 vessels, bristling with weapons. Dust plumed as they landed, scattering pine and soil. Through binoculars, Jacob caught sight of their crews, alien hunters clad in armor that shimmered like liquid metal, faces obscured by masks designed to hide fear. They moved with purpose, weapons slung low, their eyes fixed on the valley below where the predator waited. Jacob's stomach tightened. These weren't explorers. They were here to reclaim their prize, and they would not care what happened to the humans standing between them and their reputation. The predator rose when the ship settled, its body unfolding with terrible grace. Golden eyes locked on the intruders, and a sound like thunder rolled from its chest. Jacob gripped the railing, feeling the vibration echo through his bones. He weighed his options quickly. He could retreat, abandon the land he had built, let the mercenaries die trying to leash the beast again. Or he could stand where he was, a stubborn farmer daring professional killers to step foot on his soil. Both choices carried death, but one preserved who he was. He didn't retreat. The mercenaries spread into formation. Their leader, taller than the rest, advanced with a weapon humming at his side. His voice carried through an amplifier, harsh and clipped. Jacob couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was plain: surrender the creature or be destroyed with it. Jacob spat into the dirt, lifted his hammer and shouted back. "If you want him, you're going through me." The predator's growl deepened, startling even Jacob. It prowled within the cage, body tense, gaze flicking between the mercenaries and the man who refused to yield. The leader barked an order. Weapons rose. The first bolt of energy streaked across the yard, slamming into the cage with a sizzle that rattled Jacob's teeth. The steel held, but the predator exploded into motion, a blur of muscle and claw that shredded the gate apart as if mocking the very concept of containment. Jacob's heart lurched, yet the beast didn't turn on him. It launched straight for the intruders. Chaos followed. The mercenaries fired in disciplined volleys, their weapons scorching the air, but the predator moved too fast. It tore into their ranks, claws ripping through armor, jaws snapping down on limbs that moments earlier had steadied rifles. The night filled with screams and the thunder of collapsing earth. Jacob watched in grim silence, unable to look away. But he wasn't idle. Old instincts flared as he sprinted to the barn. He yanked open crates of supplies left from his service years, coils of wire, improvised charges, traps that had once slowed armored vehicles in deserts far from here. He rigged them across the yard, setting snares in the dirt and anchoring explosives where he knew the mercenaries would push once the predator forced them back. The first pair stumbled directly into his work. An explosion of shrapnel threw them aside, leaving armor smoking and weapons twisted. Jacob felt no triumph, only the steady calm of a soldier doing what needed doing. The predator noticed. Between slashes and strikes, its gaze flicked toward Jacob, recognition gleaming in those golden eyes. For a heartbeat, man and beast moved as one, separate forces woven into a single defense of this valley. The mercenaries faltered. Their formation broke, retreat turning to panic. The predator pursued with merciless efficiency, cutting them down before they could regroup. Jacob's traps finished the stragglers, the thunder of charges echoing through the valley until the air stank of ozone and blood. When silence fell, the ground was littered with wreckage. Alien bodies lay scattered, weapons still glowing faintly where they had dropped. Flames licked the edges of the forest where ships had tried to lift and failed. Jacob leaned against a fence post, chest heaving, sweat and smoke staining his skin. The predator stood among the ruins, body slick with blood not its own. It turned toward Jacob, breathing hard, claws dripping, eyes bright with something far more dangerous than hunger. Jacob braced himself. If it attacked now, he had nothing left to give. But it didn't. The beast stalked across the yard, slow and deliberate, until it reached the shattered gate. For an agonizing moment it lingered there, free to disappear into the forest, to vanish into legend once more. Instead it stepped back inside. It circled once, lowered itself to the ground, and let out a rumbling exhale that vibrated through the steel. Jacob stared stunned. The predator had chosen its place. Not the galaxy's prisons, not the mercenaries' chains. Here. His backyard. The fires beyond the ridge still burned. The sky still glowed with the promise of more ships to come. But Jacob understood now the truth every empire had missed. The predator did not stay because it was trapped. It stayed because it had found something worth staying for. Jacob tightened his grip on the hammer, exhaustion mingling with grim resolve. This wasn't the end. It was only the opening move in a game that the galaxy would not allow him to quit. And the predator, the terror that no cage could hold, had just declared which side it was on. Word traveled faster than fire in dry grass. Within days of the mercenary slaughter, the valley filled with eyes Jacob could not see but could feel. Satellites shifting in orbit, drones skimming treelines, signals crackling through bands that carried alien tongues. Jacob had no receiver to catch them, but he didn't need one. The predator's posture told him everything. It prowled at night, head lifted toward the stars, growling at the faintest whine of unseen machines. The galaxy was watching. He had expected soldiers or scavengers. Instead, a week later, emissaries arrived. Not one species but many. They descended in craft that hummed like bees, polished ships that stirred the dust into storms across Jacob's ranch. He stood on the porch, hammer in hand, while the predator coiled within its cage, eyes narrowed to burning slits. The emissaries emerged in robes, armor, exosuits, each bearing the colors of their factions, each radiating the unease of predators forced into proximity with something greater. Jacob understood their purpose before the first word was spoken. They hadn't come for him. They'd come to see if the impossible was true. The tallest among them, scaled and severe, raised a translation device. Its voice carried in perfect Earth standard, smooth but heavy with disdain. Human, you will step aside. The creature must be transferred. It cannot remain here. Jacob's jaw tightened. Transferred where? The emissary spread clawed hands toward the valley, toward the cage that stood battered but whole. To facilities built for containment. To species with resources beyond your primitive scrap. This is not your burden. Jacob let the silence stretch. Behind him, the predator shifted, its growl low, steady, and unmistakably directed at the crowd. Every emissary flinched despite the steel between them. Jacob almost smiled. Almost. You all tried, Jacob said at last. His voice was calm, the voice of a man used to issuing orders with no room for debate. You failed. This is my burden now. A ripple of agitation moved through the crowd. Arguments flared in alien tongues, cut short when the predator rose to its full height. Bars groaned under its weight as it pressed against them, teeth bared in a sound that shook the air. Jacob did not turn. He didn't need to. He felt the meaning in his bones. The beast was declaring allegiance. One emissary broke ranks, smaller than the rest, features hidden beneath a hood. Its voice quivered but carried the sharpness of truth. The council believes if the predator cannot be caged, then it must be destroyed. If it stays with you, Earth itself will be marked as dangerous. Entire fleets may descend. Jacob's eyes narrowed. He pictured his quiet valley drowned in fire, his home flattened under alien bombardments. He pictured the predator unleashed again, but this time not in defiance of hunters, in defiance of those who would burn his world. He felt the weight of inevitability settle on him like armor. He stepped down from the porch and approached the cage. The emissaries scattered instinctively as he crossed into the predator's shadow. The beast crouched, massive head lowering as Jacob rested his hand against the bars. Its breath came hot, steady, and unthreatening. To the onlookers, it must have seemed madness. To Jacob it was the only sane thing left. You see a monster, Jacob said, his voice low but carrying. I see something else. This isn't about chains. It's about respect. And if you think I'll hand him over, you're not half as smart as you claim. The emissaries murmured, disbelief mingling with fear. None dared approach. They had seen their finest mercenaries torn apart, their strongest cages shattered. Now they saw the same creature resting within steel built by a human whose resources were laughable compared to theirs. The galaxy's hierarchy tilted in that moment and they knew it. The scaled emissary hissed, claws flexing. Then you make yourself an enemy of the council. Jacob finally smiled, sharp and humorless. Wouldn't be the first council I pissed off. The predator's growl rose like thunder in agreement, rattling the earth beneath them. The emissaries recoiled, robes snapping in the wind. Whatever threats lingered on their tongues died in their throats. They retreated toward their ships, their authority shrunk to ash beneath the gaze of a beast that chose a human over them all. As engines roared and the ships lifted, Jacob remained by the cage, hand pressed to steel that still vibrated with the predator's strength. His pulse thundered, but not from fear. For the first time since the crash, he understood what this alliance meant. The galaxy did not fear the predator alone anymore. They feared what it meant that the predator stayed here willingly. When the last ship vanished into cloud, Jacob exhaled and lowered himself to sit against the fence post. The predator settled too, curling its massive frame with a huff that stirred dust across his boots. For a moment, man and beast shared silence that was less a truce and more a pact. Jacob knew what would follow. The council wouldn't accept humiliation. They would send more than emissaries next time. They would send fleets. And when they came, they wouldn't just be hunting the predator. They'd be hunting him, and every human who dared claim that Earth's ingenuity could match their empires. He looked up at the sky, where stars blinked faint and distant. They're coming, beast, he murmured. But so long as you're here, so am I. The predator's eyes glowed in the dusk, unblinking, unwavering. The sound it made then was not a growl but something deeper, a resonance that settled into Jacob's chest like an oath. The valley felt too small for what was coming. Yet Jacob understood. This was only the beginning. The cage in the backyard was silent, the steel bars slick with rain, but inside it, the predator's eyes burned with restless light. It paced, shoulders rolling with barely bridled strength, claws clicking against the floor with each step. To any observer, it would seem trapped, contained by human ingenuity and stubbornness. Yet Nathan knew better. No cage held a creature like this unless it chose to remain. He stood at the edge of the enclosure, soaked by the storm, jaw set. Beside him, Colonel Briggs rested his weight against a rifle, though it was clear the weapon would be useless if the beast decided differently. The night was alive with tension. Somewhere in the forest beyond the ridge, alien vessels had landed, their engines scarring the air with ozone. The hunters had come to reclaim their lost terror, and Nathan's backyard was now ground zero for something far larger than himself. "You still think it'll fight for you?" Briggs asked, his voice rough. He had been skeptical from the start, but tonight there was no room left for doubt or hesitation. Nathan didn't answer. He simply met the predator's gaze through the bars, and something unspoken passed between them. The creature's restless stride slowed, its eyes narrowing. It had endured cages before, alien ones, cruel ones, where pain was the only language, but here it had not been punished, not been prodded into violence. Here it had been offered quiet. A strange, impossible bond had been forged, and it had no interest in returning to chains. The first alien flare split the sky. Red light bled through the storm clouds, casting the backyard in a warlike glow. Briggs lifted his rifle. Nathan stepped forward and unlatched the cage. The sound was deafening in its simplicity, a single metallic click that echoed like a declaration of war. The predator did not surge out. It slipped forward with controlled precision, like a blade drawn from a sheath. Its muscles rippled, its head lifted to the wind, and a low growl rolled from deep in its chest. It smelled the hunters, smelled the cruelty it had once known. The forest answered back with movement, shapes shifting between the trees, armored and armed, intent on capturing what they believed was theirs. Nathan didn't flinch. He stood at the predator's side, the storm plastering his shirt to his skin, and when the first alien hunter broke cover, the beast moved faster than the lightning that split the sky. One moment the hunter stood tall, weapon raised, the next he was on the ground, throat shredded, weapon shattered. The predator did not roar, it killed with frightening, silent efficiency. The rest came all at once. Dozens, maybe more. Their weapons spat light into the night, searing holes through the rain, but the predator wove between the shots like water around stone. Each kill was decisive, merciless, but never without purpose. Nathan followed, ducking fire, using the chaos to strike when openings appeared. Briggs shouted commands, rallying the few men who had sworn to stand beside them. For the first time in his long career, the colonel realized he was not leading the charge. He was following something far more primal. The backyard transformed into a battlefield. The garden fence splintered under alien fire. Trees snapped in half as claws and plasma clashed. And through it all, Nathan never lost sight of the bond that tethered him to the beast. At times, he swore the predator shifted just enough to shield him, its immense body intercepting fire. At others, it seemed to glance at him between strikes as if asking, not commanding, but asking if this was the fight he wanted. Nathan answered not with words but with action. He pushed forward, striking at hunters who tried to flank, drawing their attention so the predator could dismantle them. Together they moved like parts of a single entity, human and monster, mind and muscle, will and wrath. At last the hunters faltered. Their disciplined assault collapsed into fear, their retreat cut off by the storm and the thing they had once commanded but could never truly control. One of the leaders, taller and heavier armored than the rest, raised a voice that carried through the din, "Return it, human. You cannot bind what belongs to us." Nathan stepped forward, chest heaving. His voice cut back, raw but unwavering. "It never belonged to you. It never belonged to anyone." The predator echoed his words in action. It lunged, striking with a force that shattered armor like brittle glass. The leader fell, split open, and the remaining hunters broke, fleeing into the storm. Their retreat was messy, panicked, and Nathan knew they would not soon forget what had happened here. Silence followed, broken only by the rain and the predator's steady breathing. Briggs lowered his rifle, staring in disbelief at the carnage. Nathan turned toward the beast, who now stood in the center of the wreckage, chest rising and falling, its body streaked with blood not its own. Slowly, carefully, Nathan extended a hand. The predator lowered its head. The gesture was subtle, but it was enough. It wasn't obedience, wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. A recognition of something new, something neither cages nor chains could define. "You could leave," Nathan whispered, almost to himself. The creature's eyes glimmered in the stormlight. It could leave, vanish into the wild, reclaim the freedom it had been denied for so long. But it stayed. Not because it was trapped. Not because it was bound. But because, for the first time, it had chosen. Briggs shook his head, letting out a short, incredulous laugh. "No one in the galaxy's gonna believe this," he muttered. Nathan finally smiled, weary but resolute. They don't need to believe. They just need to know we're not afraid anymore. Thunder rolled across the sky, carrying the scent of battle and rain into the night. The predator stood beside the man who had freed it, and together they looked toward a future that no cage could contain.